Well, good evening, everyone. Congratulations to you all. It's a wonderful Thursday night, right? And here you are spending your time here. So that is just a real testament to the quality people you are and how much you appreciate and give back to your community. So I'm a bit of a nerd. Right? It's good to have a nerd. I'm also almost a local. I grew up within a half a mile of the Mendocino border on the Bell Springs Road. And so I'm going to tell a few stories about growing up in the hills and what that means. And what I want to do today is sort of offer some reasons for hope in this space. Right? So much of this is overwhelming and feels totally out of our control, right? I mean, do you feel like embracing this fire season? We've had oodles and oodles of rain, the grass is growing taller than we've seen in a long time, and you're like, oh no, how do I embrace that? Think about the wind damage we've had, the number of trees that have come down. Like it feels like it's more and more and more each year. And so how do we embrace this issue? How do we figure out a pathway through this? Tonight, that's what I'm going to try and detangle and hopefully be able to answer some of your questions. I can go in the nerd space, I can go in the high-level space, I can go in the policy space. We can talk at a lot of different levels about what California is trying to do, what your local community is trying to do, and how you blend and fit in the middle of that. I want to start with my hats off, though, to the Mendocino County Fire Safe Council. I'm really impressed with the quality work that happens here. And I'm not just saying that for show. I mean, I feel like the website is of really high quality. The level of engagement, the level of grants of coming home, the different strategies, the engagement at so many different levels. It's just a real pleasure to see Scott run and your whole team run in this space. So my hat's off. I do a lot of storytelling and I talk a lot about Mendocino County and what's going on in Mendocino County because I'm really proud of you all. That being said, what are you all hoping to get out of tonight? Can you give me a few things? Talk to me a little bit about why you came. Steve, why'd you come?
Because I know what we've done, and I like to help.
Do you have a question? Is there anything you want to know?
Next grant.
Next grants. Okay, we'll tap Scott for that. All right, how about you?
Looking for ideas that we've missed. In previous fire station meetings, there's always so much information that we can't absorb, and maybe there will be something here that I can take home to our little fire safe council.
Okay. So a new gem, new idea. Okay, and then at the end, will you hold me and say if you learned something and what you got? Okay. How about you, Cheryl? New science. You want some new science, okay? Anybody else? Prescribed burning. I'm going to disappoint you. I'm not going to talk about that tonight. But how about you, Chief Kendall? Anything you want to know?
Yeah, I'm very happy to meet everybody here, and that's why I came, is to gain more knowledge about this, be able to support the Fire Safe Council and the good work that they do, and get to know more people in the community.
Okay, terrific. Yeah.
I'm interested in what's happened in recent fires, what you found out about, good prevention measures and some of the reasons that fires have started in this area, and what's been salvageable.
Okay, great. So she really would like to know about new things that are coming in science and what we're learning to be able to give better justification for the actions we're taking. That's exactly what I'm hoping to talk about tonight. How about you, Glenn? Did I cajole you into being here, or did?
I'm coming here to support you.
All right, fair enough. But I want to tap into your gardening brain and sort of think about what does landscaping design look like in the future? What does it really mean to be fire adapted? And what does it mean to live in California in a different paradigm, right? We've lived in this world where we have kind of this Frank Lloyd Wright architecture. Sunset Magazine has driven our aesthetic, and we love color and beauty, and we don't like to see the foundations around our houses, right? We like to have this nestled, tucked kind of view. And that is just not going to work anymore. I hate to tell you that. But we can still achieve a lot of those elements if we think a little differently and move into the adaptation space. So I want to talk about reasons for hope. But the first question I want to ask is, where are you going to be when the fire starts? The next fire starts. Chief Kendall, where are you going to be?
Right here, and willing and able to protect the citizens that we serve.
So you're going to be at work and ready, and
I hope so.
you're going to hope to be at work. How about you, lady? Yeah. Yeah. Where are you going to be?
Well, I hope I'm going to be feeling safe, but I might be packing and running.
Right. Okay. So
I'm
you're
hoping it's going to stay safe without me there.
So So you're hoping you're going to be home so you have time to put the pieces together, right? Anyone else want to think they're going to be in that space? Yeah, you hope, right? But you don't know, do you? Right? I mean, when we think about the fire that happened in Redwood Valley, we think about the fire that happened, farther south with the Tubbs fire and the Nuns fire and all those fires. They happened when? What time? Middle of the night, right? And have we solved that alert issue?
Early morning.
Early morning, right? Really? Have we solved the alert issue?
We're working on it.
We're working on it. I'm really impressed with Mendocino County. Every time I stay here, I often will be asleep in a hotel here and my darn phone will go off an alert, right? I'll be like, where is it? It's very different. I go to other counties, I don't get that same experience. You all have figured out an alert system that gives you a better response time, but that means you have to be able to hear your phone, right? Where do you guys store your phone at night?
And we have a siren in Redwood Valley now.
Oh, you do?
You don't have to hear the phone.
But you have to be awake enough to hear the siren.
And we're working on making them little
Right.
apps.
Yeah.
So that's an early warning system that does not involve your phone.
Right, so most of what we do in teaching and training is talking about the 6-hour plan. We get an evacuation warning. We have a process to be able to do a stepwise progression, and we think about the steps we're going to go through. What is the first thing you're going to do when you get that warning?
Figure out how much time you have.
Hopefully. Yes, what else? Look outside, right? Pack the car, right? Find your go bag. Find your car keys. I mean, how easy to forget your keys every day, any day now, right? I have this great story. So I was doing some work in Paradise, and I met a woman who was sifting through the ashes of her home. And she was kind enough to let me know that her husband was a physician, and he had gone to work early that morning because he was working in the hospital, and she had 2 kids. She did carpool with her 2 kids with a neighbor across the street. They went to different schools. So things were as planned that day. We know that fire started at like 5:45, 6 a.m. that day. It's November. How light is it at 5:45, 6 o'clock in the morning? Totally dark, right? She doesn't have any warning. She sends her kids to school. She takes one of the neighbor's kids to school, drops them off. Middle school, early high school, or something like this. And she starts getting immediate phone calls from her son. Hey, Mom, I don't think I should be here. She's like, come on, you need to be in school. What are you pulling my leg? What's going on? I'm like, no, Mom, I don't really think I should be here. But he doesn't really explain enough. So she's left with some things to try and figure out. And then she looks outside and she goes, well, yeah, maybe it doesn't look right. So she calls her neighbor. They both decide to go get the kids, bring them home. And she starts, and they have in Butte County a 6-hour, 60-minute, 6-minute checklist. She looks at the list and starts to work through the 6-hour checklist. She just gets that little sense that that's maybe not right. She walks outside. She sees all the birds leaving, flying in flocks. And she goes, okay, we're not on the 6-hour plan. We're on the 6-minute plan. She throws kids in the car, the turtle, dog, a couple small important things, and gets in the line of traffic to try and get out. I find that a really wonderful story. Like, the woman had enough situational awareness to look outside, to realize that maybe the alert system wasn't functioning well enough, but she knew what to do in that moment, called her husband, said, I'm moving out, and they figured out, and they both, all the family got out okay. The challenge as we think about wildfires is that most of us think that we're going to be at home, and that's not always the case. So what I want to talk today about are the things you can do when you know it's a red flag warning day and you go to town. Like, what are those actions that you're going to do because you know it's a windy day, you know we're at low humidities, we have a set of things that maybe should start to go through our mental list of actions that we do. Do we leave the skylight open? Do we leave the pet door open? Do we leave the windows open? You know, what is it that we might do on those days, and does that matter? Right? So these are some of the things that we're going to talk about today to kind of think through these choices, because you can't always predict that your life is going to be in a stepwise progression, that I'm going to be home and I'm going to be able to deploy my water system, I'm going to be able to close the door. Yes, there's a little funky thing I have to do to make the cat doors stay closed, right? And our homes are always, a little bit imperfect and all the systems don't work perfectly. But it's those little details that are going to make the difference if your home doesn't have the privilege of having your volunteer fire department, your CAL FIRE service, your local service to be able to be there and respond. So how does your home survive on its own? Okay, now, this is getting a little out there. This is my little philosophical space, so if you'll bear with me on this. What's interesting to me about this is the level of preparedness and protection and prevention that we've put in terms of investment. And I was pondering for a little while how to think about this, and I was thinking about safety belts in cars. And anyone know who was the first company to put safety belts in? Saab, certainly followed by Volvo. And it took a couple decades to actually get them to be more broadly available. They were in the front seats first. Kids didn't matter. Kids sat in back. Wasn't about kids. You know, we go through lots of bits and spurts, and generationally, and I grew up, my family car was a 62 Ford Falcon. I might have had seatbelts. I don't remember. We certainly didn't use them. Right, but this whole ability where we start to recognize that that safety feature is really important and we actually adopt it. What's fascinating to me is to look at infant car seats and car seats in general. And I don't know if any of you have had the privilege of having a child, but there's this wonderful experience of like realizing that the child, when you're in the hospital or you're ready to move somewhere if you've had the baby at home, that you do not want to let the arms relax and the legs relax because they've been so tight. So you swaddle them up and you want to hold them as you leave. And the idea that you're going to put them in the car in a 5-point harness, like, no way is that a good idea, right? I mean, that means you're gonna have to release the swaddle and like somehow weave the arms through this complicated set of points, right? It's terrifying. So how do we get people to actually do that? I mean, it is the hardest moment I'm just so seared in my brain around how hard it was to actually want to do that. How do we do that? Well, we have classes if you're going to have a baby, and they talk to you about it, and they review your car seat, and they actually come to your car and check it out. You can go to the fire department and actually make sure your car seat's installed correctly. And then when you go to leave the hospital, this wonderful nurse with warm hands and a kind voice will walk with you out to your car and help you put your baby in the car seat. It's amazing, isn't it? But think about the level of institutional investment we made to make it possible for people to understand that that safety feature really mattered. When you buy a home, who comes with a home? Does anyone come and talk to you about the safety features on your home, how your home's supposed to function, how the design system works, how it takes to maintain your home? And we're dependent upon understanding that to be able to protect our home and our families. And there's nobody there to tell you how your home works. Fortunately, there's YouTube now, and you can search the internet, and you can find all kinds of experts who will tell you all kinds of stories about what it takes to maintain your home. There's wonderful people in the hardware store who are going to give you advice. You know, there's your dad, your mom, your neighbors, right? But we have not formalized any training when it comes to thinking about how to maintain our structures. So what does it take to make a mass guerrilla campaign? And here's where my jump to kale comes into this. What's fascinating to me, and Glenn, you might know this, is what happened with kale. Kale was a vegetable that was a decorative vegetable we put in our salad bars with bowls of food on top of, right? And then somehow it became a superfood that everybody wanted to eat, and it's like had the biggest spike in growth that we've seen in any vegetable in recorded history. Right? I mean, I think it largely an inedible vegetable, and it's now a mass craving, right? What happened?
The Irish always ate it.
Well, that's good, Glenn. The Irish always ate it. In reality, there was this crazy guerrilla campaign that happened. It wasn't done by the Brassica Association. It was an underground movement that was decentralized, and Gwyneth Paltrow has a big role in it. She came on the Ellen Show, and it spiked in popularity. But we have a great opportunity to learn from other mass social media campaigns. And if we made kale sexy, and there's actually a book called 50 Shades of Kale. I mean, who would write a book called 50 Shades of Kale? But if we can make kale sexy, we should be able to make safety and protection of our homes and our families something broadly popular. So that's the challenge I have before you. Like, how do we take the messages that you're going to hear tonight and make them palatable to our neighbors, make them edible in a way that we can actually relate to? So those are vents on the bottom, if you're wondering what that is. So anyway, thank you for letting me be a little philosophical and a little edgy in that way. So what I want to do is talk about the factors that contribute to home loss. I want to talk specifically about the fire that happened in Paradise known as the Camp Fire. I want to talk about a fire in Boulder, Colorado, and then I want to get to some key actions that you all can take. take. So I'm going to use some stories about fires to be able to reinforce some of the concepts. In 2008, we changed the defensible space code in California. It went from, I'm going to pick on you, Chief Kendall, from 30 feet to what? 100 feet, right? And these were the graphics that we put together that are part of the communication document specifically for defensible space. What do they say to you when you look at them? It says to me that you live in a little cabin in the woods, right? It's a log home. You better have conifer trees. Some of them might die. And then maybe spacing matters, right? Anyone live in a log home here? Ooh, there's actually 3 people who live in a log home. Good. So that's a small percentage, though. Anybody live in a conifer forest here? Yeah, not very many people either. Oh, 2. Does that speak to you? Not really, right? But the idea is that what we're trying to do is be able to manage a wildfire coming from the outside in and hopefully reduce the flame heights so that if they're not following the fuel ladders, that they will be able to put a crew safely there. So really what it's been about has been about not creating defensible space, but creating defendable space. So it's a safe place for an engine to stage and crew to deploy. Is that a fair interpretation, Chief? Right? So here's the idea. That's what we've been promoting and promoting and promoting. And when we do that, it's always been about something coming from the outside in. And it has relatively little about thinking about what's happening from the property, from the house, from your most valuable asset out. So where we're going now is a total rebrand and a refresh, and we're going from the house outward. Because that alone was part of the equation, but not all of the equation. So now, when we talk about fire, we use 3 different terms. And these are terms that you all may have some familiarity with, but if you're able to go home and have some dinner time conversation or neighborhood conversation, this would be one of those take-home moments where you might be able to say, did you know? I didn't know. So what those earlier messages were really about mitigating the pathway of fire coming from the outside towards the home so that you can interrupt it, and so you might be able to break the pathway of fire directly to the house. So pathways are what I'm going to talk about. So that's the direct flame contact, and you are able to mitigate that by changing the fuel arrangement coming towards the home. But what we haven't done a very good job is talk about embers and radiant heat. And so you're hearing more about embers, I think, right? Everybody heard about embers in this room? You know, most of us, right? So they're also known as firebrands, and they can come from 2 forms. They can come from vegetation that is engaged in a wildfire, which can be grass, it can be leaves, it can be twigs, it can be branches. It also can be construction related, so it can be parts of buildings, right? I know in the Tubbs fire, I saw whole 2x4s move. Is your building designed to have a 2x4 lofted onto it or near it, right? They can be really big. The smaller embers can travel a mile or more, and so they can move past our traditional fuel breaks and some of those actions that we thought we've designed as important for our communities. So embers are, we'll talk a lot more about them. They lead to the largest number of home losses specifically. But radiant heat is the other secret one that we haven't been talking very much about. And that's illustrated here by this idea that a neighboring building could be yours, a shed, could be your neighbor's house, it could be your pump house, that's maybe what this looks like, or it could be enough vegetation is engaged in fire, and then you get heat transfer through the air, and that heat transfer, while you don't have contact, is sufficient enough to break glass. So if you break glass, it's like leaving the window open and you have a way for things to get in. So the pathway for mitigating each of those has some commonality about it, but each of them are slightly different. So you have to think about all 3 potential exposures when we start talking more about how do we protect our homes and structures. So here's an illustration of embers. Here's from the campfire. I think for me, when I look at that, I just think, oh my God, it's like being in a snowstorm. You know, it's swirling about you, finding all the places and all the little parts. Like, I don't know if you've ever, been in a snowstorm, you open the door and they come in the front door, right? They're in the air column and they accumulate in the same way like leaves do, or, the eddy currents that you might see around your house. So if you've got leaves and other things accumulating, and then you add embers to that, you know exactly where they're going to go. How about here? What happened here? This is the Angora fire. So this is a wildfire. Probably embers, right? Because there's all this green vegetation around it, right? It wasn't direct flame contact. It looks to me like something either went in or landed adjacent to the building, and that created direct exposure. We call that flame impingement onto the structure. Most people, when they look at something like that, they go, kitchen fire. Oh yeah, just a kitchen fire. Oh, maybe it's a wood stove. No, right? So that looks a little different. What about this? I find this photo really fun. Well, okay, so there's a lot of things going on in that image. Tell me something that you see. I'd be curious what you all see when you look at it.
It's like wood chips near the house.
So she sees wood chips near the house, and what's that making happen? That's making place for something to ignite. That's right. So they're accumulating along the bottom edge of the wall. And why is that? Wind is trapping them there. They're also flying horizontally. They're landing at the wall and then falling down. And so you get more of them at the base of the wall. So that's what that hot spot is right in this direction. These look to me like, pieces of maybe a decorative grass that was planted there. What else do you see?
On a good note, it looks like the stucco, the rock walls are doing their job.
Great point. The stucco and rock walls are doing their job, and so we're deploying a firefighter to try and put out the small spot fires there. Which
Windows might be helping.
the double pane windows might be helping, yes.
The tree is not on fire because it's been wind up.
Right, so the tree is not engaged because there's no ladder fuels there. So,
Swirling around the door.
right, that's the part I really love. So look at this pattern of eddy currents in here, right? See how this one is moving in this sort of vortex motion, where these are moving in another different motion. So people wonder, how do the under-eave vents get penetrated by embers? Well, look at that pattern. So those inside corners, places where two walls come together, are a place where you see a lot of air exchange and a lot of turbulent air patterns and a lot of potential exposure and risk there. That photo to me says a lot. So where California is going is saying we shouldn't spend that much time with a person right there. We should be able to manage these fuels so that that structure does fine on its own. Does that make sense to you? Okay. So I have the privilege of working with the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. They're out of South Carolina, and they have a lab. This is a lab that is big enough that you can construct a building in it, and then there's all these wind turbines that are associated with it, and then you can design how much volume of air you want, what velocity, what pattern, is it in gusts, is it steady? And so I want to show you a couple things related to this. So just specifically, this is the ember generator. This is a constructed building, but see how you get this collection at the base of the wall. And you can also see the spray that comes out around the corners. Corners of buildings are a little bit more vulnerable than just the straight wall. So when we talk about the 5-foot non-combustible zone, really the corner could be a little more than the 5 feet itself. There's a lot that we get the opportunity to learn when we have these kind of controlled experiments where we can sort of break it down step by step. Some of you might have seen this. What it is kind of two polar opposites. So we see a building that's connected, but it's sided differently. So one is with some kind of wood siding, looks like a cedar or redwood. One is with a fiber cement siding. There is a wood deck in both examples, kind of the front step there. But the difference is that there's a rock mulch on the gray fiber cement siding, and then there's a combustible mulch on the one with the wood siding. I wish there was something in between. I wish what we had in between was the wood siding with the rock mulch. Because what we're going to play this out, I think you'd see the same thing as with the fiber cement siding and the rock mulch. This video is going to take a minute long. I want you to think about how long it takes for specifically to get penetration into this gable end vent here and up the wall. And I want you to watch how long it takes to get these two decks ignited. So we've already got climbing the wall within 10 seconds. Within 11 seconds, you can see the ignition of the planted vegetation. 15 seconds, we get ignition underneath the deck. We got flame penetration through the deck within 20 seconds. We don't have anything happening over here on the comparison. We do have plants a little farther away on that one. Here we are 30 seconds in. See how much bend you get around the corner? And we've got full engagement underneath the deck within 35 seconds. Doesn't this happen a little faster than you think it might? And here we are, 40 seconds, we're going up the wall, and we've already got under-eave exposure, and then we're starting to get exposure to that gable end vent. So the question I want to ask you, is there something we can do about that? Get rid of the wood chips, precisely, and get rid of the vegetation adjacent to the house. Well, so the cedar shingles, so here is my argument. Cedar shingles certainly are combustible, but they generally are in the horizontal plane. It's hard to ignite something in the horizontal plane on its own. Do you agree with that, Chief Kemp? Yep. So you have to have a ledge, you have to have something that sticks out that's going to capture those embers, and if you just have pure horizontal wall, you're probably okay. The issue is really what's happening at the base of the wall there. And so when we talk about the new zone 0 defensible space, we're talking about 5 feet out horizontally and then 6 inches vertically. And the idea is that when you get embers landing at the base of that wall, then you don't have an immediate connection to that siding. So my argument is that if we had had cedar or this redwood siding and then a non-combustible rock mulch here, I think we would have seen the same outcome as we would have seen on the other side. The reason I bring that forward, yes, you can do everything, but we need to feel a pathway forward, and we need to be able to figure out that there's a step that we can do that probably still protects the aesthetic value and functionality of our home, but with a minor modification, changing that combustible mulch adjacent to the house and some of the vegetation right there, we can still protect the integrity of the house. So I want to talk about these two fires, but I want to tell you the way I frame them is thinking about particular vulnerable locations in buildings. And there are roof-to-wall intersections that we're going to talk about. There's gutters. Why are gutters matter? If you have tall trees, you've got material that drops in those gutters, you can get ignition in the gutter, and you've got a roof edge that could be vulnerable there. There's connections of fences to houses. And then here's from taken inside those buildings, and you can see the embers penetrating inside those buildings. So this is the horizontal line, this is a gable end vent, and you can see these little sparks. That's how the embers are coming in, and here's the under-eave vents, and that's where the embers are coming in. Anybody store anything in their attic? Yeah, right? So if you get embers that come inside, then the question is, do you have the potential to ignite those? So I'm going to talk about Paradise first, and here is an image from Paradise, and I worked with some colleagues, Steve Quarles, who contributed on the video series that Scott has up on his website, is really the driving expert in the home ignition space, and then we partnered with 2 other ecologists to work on this. So here's a pattern from Paradise. Anybody see anything interesting in that pattern to you? Like, what strikes you about what you see there? So those are burned buildings. I'll make that clear. Those are roads. Pardon? A lot of the trees didn't. And where did the trees burn and where did the trees not burn?
Trees burned next to the house.
Trees burned next to the house, right? So they're not in this, more open space area. They're really where there was adjacency to the house. Our homes are our most combustible part of our landscape. Let's just simply understand that. My home was built in 1955. It's of solid redwood. Do you think it's dry now? I think we've cured that redwood pretty well, right? So if we get ignition, that thing's gonna go up, no problem. So campfire, it ignited from a power line that came down early at about 5:45 in the morning. This is on the east, this is on the west, this is the town of Paradise. These are hot spots with these bright spots here that are showing where ignition's occurring. This picture was captured at 10:45 in the morning. When I was talking about that other story with the family, they were over in this location. Couple things to think about. Let's look at transportation. There's 3 arteries. They all spill onto one road to go out. There's not a huge amount of connection in between these roads. A lot of dead-end roads within those, so evacuation's super complicated. They had worked on a number of pieces, and let me just say, Butte County did some things that were really right. They made a bi-directional road, so you could actually flip both lanes going both directions, which meant that you could spill out of that road a lot faster, which is important when you need to make right and left turns, and if we don't design it for being able to switch that direction, that's really complicated. But at 10 in the morning, 10:45, we already had ignition across the whole town. And so there's a lot of stories about Paradise, a lot of things that we can learn, a lot of things that went well, but just a big old warning when it comes to thinking about evacuation, and a good lesson for us to get better in that space. And I think I'm going to put myself a little bit out on a limb, and I don't know how much CAL FIRE is going to like this, but what happens when something goes wrong and you aren't in the place you intend to be? You know, the reality is you do not want to get caught in your car. And why is that? Cars burn. It gets too hot. You can't breathe. You can't protect your airway. So you do not want to be caught out in that. You want to leave early. You want to have everything in your best capacity to get out. But occasionally, you don't have that opportunity. So where are you going to be? That is an important question. And I'll put it out there. You're going to want to be in the best constructed home possible and weather the storm for a minute and get out. Home is not going to spontaneously combust in the first 5 to 10 seconds, but that fire front can go through and you can get out. Don't stay in your car. So what we were curious about was specifically looking at the standards for new construction, and Paradise was built over many decades, but there were 140 homes that were built after the new adoption of the Wildland-Urban Interface Codes. And so how well did that adoption play out? And we were curious about that because it's, as heartless as this is, it's kind of an amazing experiment because the whole town burned all at once. And most of the focus was really on getting people out of the way and not on fire suppression. So you don't have this whole intermix of fire suppression on top of that. There's some that happens, but it's more of a more controlled experiment in that way that you don't have to deal with that interaction effect. So we were curious about that. One of the first tests was, well, where are the homes? And we were looking specifically at single family homes. There's many other home types in there. There's multifamily, there's trailers. There are a lot of trailer parks there, modular homes. But what was fascinating is the new 2008 plus, so less than 2008, those homes were built all across town, so they were well distributed. So it gave us even more reason to say, this is a place that we can spend some time putting some energy into it. So what we did is we coded the homes into those built older than 1997, those built on either side of the construction code adoption, which is 2008. And then we intersected the damage inspection data and looked at destroyed, damaged, or no impact. So damage might be cracked windows, bubbled paint, those kinds of things, but the structure was still intact. I'm not going to talk a lot about it, but what I really want to show are a couple key points. And so we talked about those 3 forms of exposure earlier, and if you can see here, look at the interaction between these 2 buildings into the vegetation, right? This element of radiant heat was very substantial. The strongest predictor of loss was the distance to the nearest destroyed structure. And that distance was 54 feet was the driving split in the data to be able to say if you were within 50 feet of a destroyed structure, the likelihood of survival was relatively low. If you're within 50 feet of a destroyed structure, the likelihood of survival is very low. So what does that say? It says we're all in this together. Our neighbor's survival, the other buildings on our property, maybe that we care less about, may affect the survival of our structure as much as anything. So to me, that says we're all in this together and we really have to work together as a community and we have to figure out how to lift each other up. That's not to say that we shouldn't do anything if you have a cranky neighbor who's not into it at all, because that happens, right? But the more we can lift together, the better off we're going to be. Of the damaged homes, 63% of them were damaged from radiant heat, so shows some of that interaction effect. I just wanted to give you a couple other illustrations of this kind of community, and you could almost call it a contagion effect, like from an epidemiological perspective. So if you get loss, what we were generally seeing is that we would lose a whole block. And if you could keep a block together, then the whole block stayed together. So there is this relationship between the contagion or the exposure that is important here. So the question was that we were mostly after, what was the, how did the adoption of the construction codes, what did we see? So here we see basically a graph that says year built by percent survived. And here's older homes in this section overall. And then here's on either side of the construction code, 1997 to 2007 versus 2008 to 2018. So we see increasing trends of survival overall. That's the good news. So our older homes survive at 11%. Versus 39% for those built in these last 2 decades. The part that was a little bit depressing to me is that we didn't see a statistical difference between either side of the construction code. And here's why. I don't know if our construction folks are still here. How long is the service life of a roof? When you put a new roof on, how long is the service life? 20 to 40, right? You pay more, you get more life in concept, right? So 20-year-old homes were generally still within the service life of their roof. The roof is fundamentally the most important part of your home because it shoulders the burden of all that exposure. So if your roof is in good shape, you have a much better chance of survival. So these on either side of the construction code, to me, you're still within the period of performance. For the last 20 years, have we been installing double pane windows? Yeah, we have. So that says something about the quality of materials we're using now compared to the older homes, but it also says to me that we have a long way for improvement, and the new defensible space codes are not even at play here. So my argument is that we're going to see this start to spike a lot more as we start to deploy the new defensible space codes and standards. So that's good news. So that was a fire that was in oak woodland and in ponderosa pine. So you've got gutters that are engaged because you have embers that are of much larger size and they're able to move and last for a longer time. I want to contrast that to a fire in Boulder, Colorado, which is in a grassland system. So here's Boulder, Colorado. This is on the day of the fire. It's December 30th, 2021. It is after a long drought period. The ignition point, we know what the ignition point is. We still don't know exactly what happened. But this is the fire burning through Boulder, Colorado. It captured the hearts and minds. Everybody was home on New Year's Eve. So if you live in an open plains on the backside of the Rocky Mountains, how do you create privacy? Fences, exactly. You either plant trees or you plant fences, or you install fences. So if you look at how there's no natural features to be tucked among, and ways to kind of separate each other. So those fences really became an important point. So I was with a team that was after the question of, well, kind of similar construction overall, but was there something different about this block of homes versus these that maybe led to their survival or failure? Answer was no. No difference. What we did see is we had community response or firefighter response that basically stopped that pathway from one to the next. Different construction styles, different construction codes in Colorado, so not a huge amount to learn from them. But what we saw as we spent more time digging in is that every home was connected by a fence. This spaghetti, a labyrinth of wooden fences that connected one home to the next. So grassland fire. So you have grassland embers. How far does a grassland ember go and still be viable? Anybody know? I said 1 mile, but that wasn't for grass. You guys know, so I'm gonna, you've got grassland fire, how far are those embers gonna distribute? Not very far. So you have to have something that is the conduit to the buildings themselves because you don't have all this woody vegetation that's pushing stuff along. So you get embers, but they only land on the dry grass for a little ways. But at the base of the wooden fences, you still get leaf litter and debris and things that are caught there, right? And so they become the net. Then you get another bigger fire, you get ignition in the fence, and then the fence directly connected to the house. So what we saw in these cases, there was occasionally someone that stayed behind, someone with a garden hose, or then we actually had the fire personnel who were able to come in. But we learned a lot of other interesting things about that. And I'm not arguing for staying behind, I'm just saying there was some level of intervention that occurred. So here's a case where brand new construction, this is like 2020 construction, this is a condo or multifamily. There was a decision to hold the fire at this walkway. There's kind of uphill slope coming this direction. So a whole set of townhouses basically burn on that, on this side. And what was interesting was to look at the level of exposure that happens to those remaining buildings. And so you can look and see kind of how individual components perform. And so what we see is a comparison of annealed versus tempered glass. So who can tell me why you'd put tempered glass in a sliding glass door? It's safety glass, right? It breaks differently, right? Anyone ever unfortunately walked through a sliding glass door? Or does anyone admit that, right? So it occasionally happens, right? You bump into it, so you want to put that in because the glass breaks differently. But it also has gone through a heat treatment, so it's 3 times stronger in heat resistance than the annealed glass. So the annealed glass is put up in these kind of decorative daylight windows, and you're less likely to have an interaction with them, like a safety interaction. And if they do break, how do they break? They break in shards, right? So you can see the side-by-side comparison. So all the annealed glass was lost from the heat exposure, but the tempered glass itself did just fine. Pretty cool. Isn't it kind of cool to see how those work side by side with each other? You can also see broken glass and the vinyl windows are damaged. A lot of the facades here actually had damage in them. They weren't that thick. So it's just kind of fun to see all that stuff play out and see these products. So if you have a window, let's say you live in Ukiah here and your neighboring house is 10 feet away, what I want to offer the idea is that you might want to upgrade that window because you're so close to another building. Just that window potentially. So if you move that one to tempered glass, you'd have a lot more heat resistive qualities. If you have a farther distance away, you can probably stick with your traditional annealed glass. Double pane, of course, is better. And now it seems like you mostly get both panes double paned now in tempered glass, what we commonly see. So just some more images of this fence connection piece. You can also see how the heavy timbers that were part of the retaining walls engaged, and these were the pathways that were bringing fire to the homes. Now, this story is kind of interesting. So this is another example. This is a golf course on this side. The fire comes this direction. This building has firefighter response on it, otherwise it would be a pile of rubble and nothing else. There was firefighter response that prevented the adjacent structure from burning. And we spent a bunch of time trying to figure out, well, why did one ignite and the other, and what was the pathway through that? And what we ultimately concluded, this is an interesting stucco wall, so it's wood framed, it's wrapped in stucco, and there's hardware cloth at the base of it. And so what happens is the embers land on the grass in the golf course, then kind of wick themselves back, run into the stucco wall. There's a lot of debris caught at the base of it because things blow around there. We get ignition in that debris, and there's a fence. You see one member here and another member here, and there's some bender board. Anybody know like that defining garden bender board that is contributing to kind of holding a nice planting bed? And basically we get a pathway of ignition along this fence, takes a hard right corner and attaches to the building here. The fence ignites. The building is made of stucco. The only wood exposure is a fiber board that's part of the under eave vent here, or the under eave area, and we then get ignition enough in that area and into the attic. So the pathway, fence, bender board to house. Could we have made a difference there? Is there something someone could have done there? Do you need to have had that fence attached to the house? Maybe, maybe not. Could you change the fence attachment? Probably. You could put a wire fence. You could put a different way. You could put metal there. Certainly, you can keep privacy there, but just that wooden last connection point, if you can break that pathway, I think that building would have done just fine. We flipped around to the other side of the house and we discovered there was another way that fire got into it. And this is a bit of a surprise. So the embers were coming from that street, coming this way. It's garbage day, so all the garbage cans blow over. I don't know, it seems to be the universal rule I see, so that's how this Coca-Cola box is there. Put some more debris about. This is rock mulch. Here's the walkway, and this is one of these kind of funny decorative conifers that you might occasionally see in the little pot for a little Christmas tree thing wrapped up. Holds on to all of its needles. They shed and they just hold on to the needles, and it's just like a giant mess of senesced needles in there. So it's pretty easy to get ignition in that, as opposed to normally you need to have ignition at the base to kind of preheat and get fire going up into the taller vegetation there. But we get ignition fully in that tree, and then it puts flames right underneath the under eave area there. We also get ignition in some of these other decorative plants, and we get penetration into the vents there. These are the kinds of reasons you're seeing that this new defensible space zone are coming on board. Because if we didn't have that piece right there, that piece of planting or that tree right there, we would have had a lot more protection on that structure. I will say, and I didn't go into this, but the way this stucco is assembled, it also has a vulnerability. It doesn't have a drip edge. If you stick your finger right at the underneath side of it right here, you can actually feel the fiberboard that's behind it, so it's not wrapped. So even though it's stucco, if we had had flames basically at that base, we would have gotten flames inside the wall cavity, and the stucco wouldn't have mattered. So the assembly matters in how things are put together, basically, have a part to play in all of this. So just because you have stucco doesn't mean everything's perfect. These are images that came from our 2008 guidance around defensible space, or maybe it's 2006. This was kind of our thinking around how we thought about these issues. And what's right? We've got mowed grass. We've got our fuel ladders managed. Our canopies are barely touching. We've got a nice driveway. We've got an irrigated lawn. But now, you know, with your eyes now, what do you see? Do you see anything that you'd want to change? Yeah, look at this moat of woody vegetation that we've placed around that building. It's too close. It's hard to maintain the moisture content in that vegetation. What happens if you're out of town for a couple weeks, your irrigation system breaks? What happens when we're in drought and your water gets cut off? Like, that's a lot of vegetation to maintain. So what you're seeing in California coming is basically the guidance, and then will become the requirement to remove that vegetation adjacent to the house. So we now have a new defensible space zone coming. It's called Zone 0, or a non-combustible zone. It's 5 feet around the house and around any attached structure, like a deck or stair landing. See how it bulbs out like that? And the idea is that, you know, if you have embers land there, there's nothing to ignite. It will break the pathway of fire through our traditional work around creating islands and separation and limbing and pruning, like we've always done with Zone 1. But we are adding this moat, shall we call it, to fireproof our homes to a higher degree. Now, that's not saying no vegetation anywhere. It's just saying back it off a little bit. So you see you've got islands, you've got focal points, you still have things to look at, but it's switching in how we're framing it. You'll also see the non-combustible gate attachment here. So yes to fence, but look, as it comes in a perpendicular attachment, we're going to try and change what happens as it wraps to the house. And then, you know, this image is meant to try and say that we're in each other's spaces, right? And, you know, we only have to manage legally to the edge of the property, but we share some of that proximity to each other, and we need to share in sort of our mitigation and responsibility strategies between properties. Nothing is really changing in terms of the kinds of separation between plantings and slope, but I think there's a couple more illustrations that are worth thinking about here. So we always know that steep slopes are problematic, right? And that's because, you know, fire can burn uphill, but it also preheats as it goes, and so you get drier and drier vegetation as the fire is coming up the hill. You'll see a lot of people say, well, can I put a retaining wall in? Can I do something to break it up? Well, certainly, but you also have to be able to manage the flame heights that come from that retaining wall. So if you had tall trees here, clearly that retaining wall would be overcome by the potential flame height. So the retaining wall idea is supposed to be matched essentially to the height of the flames that would be coming off the vegetation it will be exposed to. everyone asks about plant lists, right? Right, everybody wants a plant list, right? I just want to know if I do that, it's going to be okay, right? I would love to run a little experiment. So you already have a sense that I'm slightly energetic and I will do anything to help a community. So it doesn't mean I'm home very much. So you and we both buy lavender. We plant it on the same day and we come back a year later. Whose lavender is going to be in good shape? Her lavender is going to be in good shape. Both same plant, right? But it changes, right? Lavender grows bushy, it has dead material, it needs to be pruned, it needs to be watered. You've done all of that. Mine is a sticky, nasty, woody bush now, and yours is lush and supple. Same plant list, 2 different people, right? So that's the problem with plant lists, right? The conditions change. They really vary upon the caregiver to that plant. So don't be duped into thinking that the plant list is going to save you and still try and put the plant in the wrong place, right? It's really about the care, the maintenance, and the stewardship of that plant. So all plants in California will burn regardless of how they're marketed. Think about that. There's certainly ones that are more complicated, but you can even take something like a manzanita that has all kinds of dead limbs and dead material under it, and you can prune it and limb it and change how it's structured, right? So you can do the same thing with a palm. Palms are a little more complicated, but you can make a difference in this. So people choose native and drought tolerant for all the right reasons, but it doesn't make them any more fire resistant. It might make them more resilient, that they're able to respond post-fire, but it doesn't make them any more resistant. So I know that's a hard point for folks. What I really want to say is right plant, right place, right care. That's the framework. Okay, so I'm going to fast track into some of the components of buildings and try and prioritize some of this stuff in a bit more. What I want to say, the only thing I didn't really talk about earlier is when you have roof to wall intersections, the issue is that you're asking the wall to perform as well as the roof. And it's not designed to do that. So where you have the intersection of the roofing plane with a really nice roofing that's robust to fire exposure, the wall itself is not. And so if you have a situation like that, anybody have it? This is shown as a dormer. There are some things that can be done to this exposed siding here that can make a difference. And so that's flashing, that's increasing the fire hardening of that wall, and there's some more details that we have on the website to go through and talk about what that might look like. Because you're here, I want to make sure we spend some time talking about vents. So, this is what are in most of our houses, which are the 1/4-inch mesh screen. They're great. And they're great because they let moisture out. I have a house that's in a wet area and I have a lot of moisture underneath my house. I need to get that moisture out. But because the vent screen is so big in size, we can also get embers that penetrate it and you can get fire inside your house. So what we're talking about now is going from 1/4-inch screening to 1/8-inch screening. Can you add 1/8 inch over 1/4-inch screening? Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to replace the vent. You can just add some more screening to it. So screening a stapler, you can make a big difference. You can also go to some of these new vents that have been created. So there's been some innovation in the space that are designed to resist both flames and embers. And I am not a rep for these Vulcan vents, but I thought I'd just share with you. There's some also at the back table. So these have really fine mesh on one side, slightly less fine on the back side. There's an aluminum honeycomb in the middle, and then it's filled with an intumescent paint so that if it gets exposed to heat, it seals up. So here's one that I've tortured. And can you see me through it? There's still some places where you can see through it. I'll pass it around so basically it seals up and shuts itself down. It takes about a minute for that process to happen. So we saw in 30 seconds you can get a lot of flame exposure, but you would replace it later, but if it saved your home, who cares, right? Because your home's still there. There are a variety of other different systems. Here's a through roof vent with steel wool. This one is kind of a tortured path where you can't get air through it super quickly, and so the embers collect inside there and don't make it all the way into the house. So I'll pass these around. I'd love to have them back at the end of the night. But where you can't manage the vegetation or where you have more fire vulnerability and likelihood of flames, it's well worth going this pathway. I was shocked actually to see the price increase. So I used to talk about this one being $25, and I think what I heard from the Mendo Mill folks is that they've gone up to $65 for this for that foundation vent. So a little more expensive than they have been in the past. Here's just a couple ideas. Anyone want a new side hustle? Anyone want to join me in something? We do not have great innovation yet in the gate space. And so you can't just go to Home Depot or Mendo Mill and say, I need a new non-combustible gate. Anyone got one? Nope, it's not there yet. So we're looking for people that want to help design beautiful gates that people are excited about installing, that maybe have great filigree on them and great artistic design, things that inspire you, that make you say, I live here, it's awesome. But here's, someone's do-it-yourself home version of it. Totally functional, still means the dog and the kids are inside, but it's changed the vulnerability to the house. So I've made some brochures here. I'm going to pass some of them out, which go into exhaustive detail about all the different components that you might want to think about. And within a home, there are issues with the decks. There's issue with the drip edge around how the roof edge is designed. Class A roof standards, which if anyone got it's not hard to get a Class A roof these days. The vents, the roof to wall flashing, the variety of things that we've been talking about. So how do you prioritize out of this? Where do you start? Feel a little overwhelming? There's a lot of different vulnerabilities. So where you start really depends on the condition of where you live and the condition of how many combustibles are around your house. So everyone should be having a roof that's of the highest quality that is not worn out. I lived in a house that had its original roof from 1955 until 2 years ago. Nice, beautiful redwood roof. I knew I was the pot calling the kettle back, but I just didn't have the money yet. So what did I work on? Getting my alert system ready, getting my evacuation system ready, because I knew that my house was vulnerable and there was nothing I could do about it until I took out a home loan and then redid the roof. But your roof is the most important part, along with your vents and then the first 5 feet. So everyone should go home and look at the condition of the roof. Think about the vents, think about how much it would take to get a staple gun and some fine mesh and change the vent condition, and start looking at all those plantings and thinking about how they might address those plantings, because those first 5 feet really matter. So what's happening in California is Zone 0 is going to be rolled out in about 1.5 years. It will apply to new construction first, and there'll be a year of gratis and education, and then it will kick in for existing construction in all SRA, and then likely it'll be adopted into very high and high LRA, local responsibility area. And I assume there's local Ukiah Valley Fire here. So it won't apply at every element of every component of every community, but broadly it's coming across the board. If you're thinking like, I just don't want to dress this, like I love my flowers and this is just wrong, I don't know what the hell she's talking about. Let me make it clear. The insurance industry's already moved into this space. And so the ability to have insurance in your home is really going to start coming down to adoption of some of this stuff. They see the data, they collect their own data, they get it, and they understand how much vulnerability we have in that vegetation debris around our houses. So it's coming. It's coming, and you just got to embrace it. I know it's hard. If you live in a condition where you've got steep slopes, there's a whole bunch more vulnerability on that underside of the deck area that needs to be considered. And if you're in a place where you've got buildings that are in close proximity to each other, they could be your own or your neighbors, we're advocating about a 30-foot separation. Then we want people to start thinking about upgrading windows to that dual pane tempered glass, maybe deployable metal shutters and other things associated like that. Maybe increasing the fire hardening on walls that are in close adjacency to each other. Okay, question, I saw you had one back there.
What about metal roofs?
Metal roofs are great, absolutely. Not aluminum roofs, but metal roofs are better. Class A is Class A. So comp shingle, Class A, great. Roll roofing with assembly meets Class A standards. It's really about keeping your roof in good shape.
Your wooden doors, you must have wooden doors.
So what about wooden doors versus metal doors? To me, I am more worried about what's at the base of that door and whether I have a doormat that's ignitable, whether I have things that are collected at the base of it, and whether I have a good weather seal around it. During the August fire, the place I grew up on, Bell Springs Road, I have a cabin, and I couldn't be there to take care of it. I don't know if you remember, but the August fire did this massive push. It went 20 miles in one day, came within 5 miles of my cabin. I just sat there and went, okay, you're gonna make it. And when I came back a couple weeks later, I opened the front door. What did I see? I saw a plume of ash, like 6 feet underneath my front door. I was like, yeah, I've been thinking about that weather stripping for a long time. I hadn't done anything about it. So now what I do, it's a cabin. I take a roll of foil tape, bitumen tape, sticky on one side, and actually seal at the base of my door when I leave my cabin. I get 2 or 3 uses out of it. You know how much I spent on that tape? 5 cents. Like a roll maybe cost me $15, but I spent 5 cents on that little section right there. Small details matter, so I'm less worried about the wooden door unless there's nooks and crannies and things to have things get caught and lodged in that. Do you agree?
Yep.
Okay. Other questions? Nope. All right, I'm running around. Oh, yep. Bitumen tape. Mm-hmm. It's a foil tape. I can also use it to seal up my vents when I go to leave. Aluminum foil can work really well. Let's say you have the 6-hour plan and you can actually shut some of your vents off. That's the thing you can do. You can use plywood to shut those vents off if you have the time. You need 6+ hours to kind of work it through. But
Also, do you recommend fire retardant paint?
I do not recommend fire retardant paint. And I'll show you why at the end. They don't perform over longevity very well. You get some performance out of them, but it's a regular maintenance thing, so I'd rather people put some more energy in other places than spend time doing that. Question?
So just confirmation for myself. When you say steep slopes and the trees, back to that,
Yeah.
trees near the deck, are you saying 30 feet away then? Okay, just a minute.
Well, there's different standards. In the state responsibility area, what we're asking people to do is limb up so you don't create the fuel ladders and create some separation so you don't have branches over the house. When you look at the insurance company standards, they're saying nothing over the building at all. So you could have a tall tree way up above and they're saying no. Question?
So we own a tree service, we're doing this work, and most of the people are fighting us on what they say they don't want to. We spent all this money taking care of all this stuff, we want to get out and try to explain to them, but so what should we, we're telling them 150 feet all the way around the house.
So it's not 150 feet of no vegetation. So the thing you're gonna have to detangle is what area they're in and what they're responding to. So in state responsibility area, this is what the standard looks like, roughly. You have fuel ladders taken away. You have separation between trees. You may have clumps of trees, but you don't have a pathway from one tree to the next. You still need, people still need shade and heat management and other things. The insurance company standards are saying you can't have a tree here with branches over the top. That means they have to be in one of the programs that the insurance companies have, and not everyone is going to be in those programs.
The insurance companies are sending a letter and
Yeah.
they're saying either do this or we're gonna cancel insurance. So we go into Trinity, we take pictures of
Yeah.
the tree, and then send pictures back to them, and
They've been
no problem with it. Even my own properties, I had them contact me and it's like, well, yeah, I think I can handle that since I'm a tree service, so I kind of lucked out there. But where you have the blue line in there, what is that? That 15, 20 feet?
That's 5.
5 feet.
5 feet.
And then we limb up everything all as far around as we can. But it just seems like
It's a lot. We're in a period of adjustment right now. The Board of Forestry's regulations have not been codified, so there's still room for a little improvement in there. We'll have that done probably in the next 6 months, and then it will become much clearer what we're doing. There's a lot of people that are in that space trying to push around. I don't know what you do when the insurance company says, this is my standard, because you can go ask another insurance company, but it's hard to get a second quote in this space. So we're in a difficult period.
the insurance
Right. We're in a difficult period right now. Anyway, you saw inside your brochure, there's a lot of more detail in here. Here's things you can take home and talk about. Let me just conclude by saying, in my mind, there's really reason for hope in this space. Like, we understand this stuff better than we have in the past. We now have a predictable pathway forward through this. There's a way to get through it. It's hard to be able to respond to, like, I need to change everything all at once, right? This is trying to say, here's how we do it in a stepwise way, and here's some of the actions we can take. The challenge is, how do we get unified messaging and alignment? It's messy right now, and I have a little bit of interaction with the insurance companies, but everyone's trying to figure that all out. And I'll just conclude by saying I'm really impressed with the work that Scott's bringing, and the teams are bringing, really trying to think about how we lift our most vulnerable, how we protect each other, how we work as communities, and try and embrace this stuff at a broad scale. So there's some great stuff coming. Let's test our knowledge. What do we do here? So maybe we take a weed whacker, clean some stuff up here. What else do we do? Wait, so and you're gonna cut those trees down, aren't you? Yeah.
Or give them a very good haircut.
A very good haircut. I'm gonna sign up for the alerts. If this is where my mom lives and she's 80, I'm gonna maybe get her out during the dry time of year and have her in town with me, because maybe it's too much. There's different strategies in this space. What about here? What if you're invited to this property owner's place? Okay, so here's what I'd start with. I can't believe you get to live in the most beautiful place. I am so jealous. Look at that view, right? That's home for them. That's all they've got, potentially. We have to lead with empathy. We have to lead with understanding. We have to figure out how we connect. We can't shame people for living in that place because they got that view, and I'm actually really, truly jealous. But there's a lot of work to do, right? There are a lot of openings in various locations. There's junipers, there's debris. But do they have insurance? Probably not. If they lose their home, they lose everything, right? So how do we help this person if they're in our community? We work together, don't we? Yep. And we bring our resources and we call Scott and we say, I love Joe, and how can I help here, right? And we really do it. This is a roof that's covering, a structure that got a lot of heat load on it, got snow on it, and so they, figured out a redesign. They added a bonus room somewhere along the years. How about here? Yeah, we got a lot of firewood. We got some stuff stored under the deck. Anybody store anything under the deck? Good. Bad habit. Stop storing stuff under the deck. I know it's out of sight, out of mind, but not so good. But there's a lot of right things here. We've got a nice water tank. We've got a lot of clearance in general. It's a little bit of fine tuning. Not too bad. We've got some places here where we might want to pay some more attention there, but all looking pretty good. How about here? Anybody have this situation? I mean, it's neat and tidy. It's all tucked away, right? There's a lot to be said there. My thought, don't you like it? Fire only. So my thought here, let's enclose it. Let's either put a new shed somewhere else farther away from the property, or let's enclose it. Because those are, that's your firewood. That's all the important stuff. It's nice and convenient and close to the house. But there are things that we could do here, right? Because if you get ignition there, that's a real pain. It's just, we all live in different structures. We all have different issues. Maybe we're not storing wood on top of our house to keep our roofing on, but there's a whole set of pathways and issues in each of our structures. And you can already see the rot that's occurring here because you don't have vertical clearance and you've got a lot of accumulation of the oak leaves there. So there's lots of work to be done. And we just got to start somewhere. What I would encourage you to do, start on the side of the house you care the least about, especially in the gardening, right? Because it's, maybe that your special stuff is right where you walk up. Well, start somewhere you don't care so much, get practice at it, so that when you get back to the front of the house, you've figured it out and you've got your formula and it makes sense to you. So I want you to mentally think about your take-home actions. What are you going to do? What are you going to do first? What did you learn that was new? Anything?
The edges,
The edges, the roof edges, yes?
we're gonna do better, band cover.
Better vent covers, okay, excellent. Anybody else?
Get those leaves right.
Get those leaves raked, I know. We're gonna rake America great, aren't we? Sorry, that's a bad joke. Anyone else?
The embers are crazy.
The embers are crazy, yes.
You mentioned propane at all.
Oh, I didn't mention propane at all. Okay, so which kind of propane would you like me to talk about?
I have a big propane tank. It's about 30 feet away from the house. And it goes, the pipe goes under the driveway and then into the house. What's the danger there?
Okay, so this lady has a propane tank 30 feet away from the house, which is hard piped in, but it's buried line. Is your propane tank on a cement pad?
Yes.
I think you're good.
Yeah, I would just recommend cleaning around it, making sure that there's nothing that, leaves and things do build up under them. So from time to time, go out and use a blower or something, blow that off, and remove any weeds or anything around it. If that's the case, you're perfectly fine. Don't stack things against it, don't put things around it, but,
So the place where it goes into the house.
The place where it goes into your house, so that is probably some hard pipe, it's probably metal pipe, right? So you can put some fireproof caulking perhaps on the junction going through if you've got a gap. You probably have that covered already because you want to keep the insects out. So you should be in good shape. What about a portable propane tank for a barbecue? Anyone have that on the deck? Yeah. So what do you do when it's time to evacuate? What do you do?
Okay, so I'm gonna take this one.
Uh-huh.
So I created a fuel dump at my home, and I live in the wildland interface. And so when I leave, if I'm going to evacuate, I put all of my fuels out of my buildings with a sign so that when the fire department does come down my driveway, they see where all of my fuel is. And where I happen to choose to put my fuel out of my building as part of my evacuation plan. I also shut my propane tank off before I leave as part of my evacuation plan. Is I put it on my burn pile that I had done burning throughout the winter time. And that's in an open space and it's visible from.
So there's no grass, you're putting it onto an ashy pile, ash area.
So I've collected all of the stuff that the fire department may run into and worry about or explode in front of their face. And I put it in one space so that they can clearly see where it is.
Okay, I understand your strategy. What's your reaction?
Yeah, if you have jerry cans and stuff inside your house, they're not gonna be a problem unless your house is on fire. Okay, or if it's in a closed building, that is not gonna be an issue. It would be an issue if an ember got through, and if you're doing these things, it will set you for better success. Leaving jerry cans out in the sun or things like that, that does create some issues. Or if you had fire that ran through there, that could be an issue. You know, so with those, it's kind of a double-edged sword. But if it is tucked away in your house, you're probably okay, or in your garage where embers and stuff is not going to get it. If your house is on fire, it's going to accelerate it. But by that time, you're probably having bigger issues than that inside. What's your thoughts on that?
No, I totally agree. Especially if it's the plastic cans, you're gonna get embers into their overpressurization of those plastic and it's gonna rupture and then we've got a bigger fireball. Even if nothing around, so.
Where do you store your gas cans for your generators?
Your gas cans for your generators should be in a fuel shed that is made of non-combustible walls and is designed basically to resist fire at all costs. That's what the real answer is. For the propane tank, what I recommend people do for the barbecue propane tank, shut it off and remove the propane tank and take it either away from the property or tuck it into the garage.
So here's the issue, is most of your examples are perimeter foundational homes.
Sure.
You live in a lot of us, especially people who are here that are going to be sharing with the fire safety councils, live in spaces where we're on
Post and pier. Yeah.
So almost all of the things that you were showing here, for people who live on post and beam, where leaves go under, things can go under your house, the aspect of just a roof being
Sure.
a big part changes completely if you don't have a perimeter foundation.
So let's talk about what we do exactly in that.
We need to get more information out what we do as folks who do not have perimeter foundation.
Sure.
My personal idea was I've used old roofing, and if I have to evacuate, I skirt my own with old roofing. It's cheap, cost efficient.
Like metal roofing?
I've numbered each piece.
Sure.
So I can keep them separate. I got my gloves there, drove keyhole design, boom, boom. My evacuation's done. My bottom part is taken care of.
So it's metal roofing, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I just had a bunch of old metal roofing. I'm like, how can I make a
Okay, so I totally appreciate what,
information?
can I help you with that?
Yes, please.
Okay, so it's a terrific question, and I agree. I haven't shown a bunch of slides related to that really much more rural lifestyle where you are on post and beam. My cabin's on post and beam. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's a really easy way to build. You can be on, and still have the same robust foundation. The issue is what is caught underneath. And so if you happen to have post and beam and you have nothing caught underneath, like you don't have a planter bed, you don't have really funky corners, and you can have embers just roll right underneath, it's really not that big of a problem. It's if it's gonna catch and hang in there and you create ignition, then the issue comes about. What I would encourage you to think about, if you've made temporary covers, why don't you start to work towards sealing that off so you actually have more of a permanent deflection area so you don't get the sunlight bleeding in and have to manage and maintain the other vegetation that starts to grow underneath. The majority of underneath your house is not gonna produce, you're not gonna get the blackberries there, you're not gonna get the grass in general, but you do wanna keep all that stuff out if you can't do it. But when you do that, you also have to put in venting systems because you don't want all that moisture that's underneath your house to then not have a pathway out because then you can get rot building up in the undersection of your house, which is problematic. So think about the pathways. Think about embers coming forward. Think about direct flame contact. Figure out how you can break both those off, and then think about the radiant heat issues that are pushing on the outsides and surrounding your building. You're gonna be able to get access to my slides. There's lots and lots more resources. You can dig into understanding what meets the current building standards respective to Chapter 7A to look at the different component parts and be able to say, does that part fit the standard, does that not? I also wanna put some attention. Look, see, I even put Fire Safe Mendocino. It's on my standard slides. See how good that is? I also want you to look at these National Fire Protection Association fact sheets. There's a set of them. There's one on how to build decks to new performance standards. I'm gonna point to you for a second, Sarah, because what's really cool is there's some new ways to build decks that actually make a difference, and they're not expensive. And so there's some small modifications that can be made. There's also fact sheets about other vulnerable locations and exterior sprinkler systems, and there's gels and coatings that are in there. Oh yeah, gels and coatings and things to think about there. So we can go on for hours and hours. I want to let those people go who want to go, turn it back to Scott, and then I'll be happy to stick around and be able to talk through individual questions. With that, I just want to thank you and encourage you for doing the great work you do.